The 11-year-old boy sat on the concrete curb, his thin shoulders shaking with sobs that echoed off the empty school parking lot. His Spider-Man lunchbox lay open beside him, its contents scattered across the asphalt like evidence at a crime scene. A police officer stood over the spilled food, taking photographs with methodical precision, while another officer scribbled notes on a pad. The yellow school bus pulled away with a diesel rumble, leaving behind only the acrid smell of exhaust and the boy's quiet whimpering. "Please, Officer Martinez, I didn't do anything wrong," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of traffic. His name was Danny Morrison, and 20 minutes earlier, he had been excited about sharing his specially prepared lunch with his best friend Jake during their usual spot near the back of Bus 47. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. Danny's mother, Sarah Morrison, had carefully packed his lunch according to the strict dietary guidelines provided by his pediatric gastroenterologist. Danny suffered from severe food allergies and Crohn's disease, a combination that required meticulous attention to every ingredient that entered his system. The lunchbox contained homemade rice crackers, organic almond butter, a thermos of bone broth, freeze-dried strawberries, and several small containers of supplements that looked suspiciously like pills to the untrained eye. Sarah had spent years perfecting Danny's diet, working closely with nutritionists and medical specialists to ensure her son could maintain his energy levels throughout the school day. Each item in his lunchbox served a specific purpose. The rice crackers were gluten-free and easy on his digestive system. The almond butter provided essential proteins without triggering his nut allergies to peanuts and tree nuts. And the bone broth helped heal his inflamed intestinal lining. As Danny climbed onto Bus 47 that morning, he noticed something different. Karen Hutchinson, the usual friendly bus monitor, had been replaced by a woman with steel gray hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every student's movement. This was Karen Blackwood, a substitute monitor who had recently moved to Millbrook Elementary's district after what she described as disciplinary issues at her previous school. Karen Blackwood prided herself on maintaining order. She believed children today were too coddled, too permissive, and desperately needed firm boundaries. As she watched Danny settle into his usual seat and pull out his lunchbox, her eyes narrowed. She had been briefed about troublesome students, and something about this particular child's behavior struck her as suspicious. "You there, Spider-Man backpack," Karen called out, her voice cutting through the cheerful chatter of the other children. "What's in that container?" Danny looked up, confused. "It's my lunch, ma'am. My mom packed it for me." Karen strode down the narrow aisle, her heavy boots creating sharp echoes against the metal floor. She had spotted the small pill-like supplements through the clear container, and years of watching crime dramas had convinced her that she was witnessing something nefarious. "Open it. All of it. Right now." The other children fell silent, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the bus. Danny's hands trembled as he opened each container, explaining in his soft voice what each item was for. "These are my digestive enzymes, and this is bone broth because regular soup makes me sick, and digestive enzymes." Karen interrupted, her voice dripping with skepticism. "That's what drug dealers tell kids to call their pills. I've seen this before." She snatched the container of supplements from Danny's hands, examining them under the bus's fluorescent lighting. "These look exactly like the controlled substances they warned us about in our training." Danny's face went pale. "No, ma'am. They're from my doctor. My mom can show you the prescription if you—" "Don't lie to me, young man." Karen's voice rose to a shout that made several younger children start crying. "I'm calling this in immediately. Driver, pull over at the next safe location." Bus driver Tom Chen had been driving school routes for 15 years and had never encountered anything like this. Through his rearview mirror, he watched the scene unfold with growing unease. "Ma'am, Maybe we should just call the school and— I said pull over! Karen screamed, causing Tom to swerve slightly as he searched for a safe place to stop. She was already dialing 911 on her cell phone, her voice taking on a dramatic urgency that made the situation seem far more serious than it was. This is Karen Blackwood, official school bus monitor for Millbrook Elementary. I need immediate police assistance. I have a student in possession of what appears to be controlled substances. The 911 operator's voice crackled through the phone. Can you describe the substances? Ma'am. Multiple pill-like objects in unmarked containers. Suspicious liquid in a thermos. And the child is being evasive about their purpose. Karen replied, glaring at Danny, who had begun to cry. I believe this could be a drug distribution situation involving minors. Danny tried to speak up. They're not drugs. They're my medicine. Please. You can call my mom or Dr. Patterson. They'll tell you. Quiet, Karen snapped. You've already lied to me once. Anything else you say will only make this worse for you. The bus pulled into the parking lot of a small strip mall, and within minutes, 2 police cruisers arrived with their lights flashing. Officer Martinez was the first to board the bus, his hand resting cautiously on his utility belt as he assessed the situation. Behind him, Officer Rodriguez began setting up a perimeter, as if they were dealing with a major drug bust, rather than a confused 11-year-old with a lunchbox. Ma'am, what exactly are we dealing with here? Officer Martinez asked Karen, who immediately launched into a dramatic retelling of events that bore little resemblance to what had actually occurred. This student was acting extremely suspicious, trying to hide various pill containers and refusing to cooperate when I asked about their contents. Karen said, her voice taking on the tone of someone who had just prevented a major catastrophe. When I pressed him for details, he became agitated and started making up stories about medical conditions. Officer Martinez looked at Danny, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. The child hardly looked like a hardened drug dealer, but protocol was protocol. Son, I need you to step off the bus with your lunchbox. We're going to sort this out. Okay. Danny stumbled down the bus steps, his legs shaking so badly he could barely walk. The other children pressed their faces against the windows, watching in horror as their classmate was treated like a criminal. Several had pulled out cell phones and were recording the scene, though neither Karen nor the officers noticed. Please don't arrest me, Danny whispered as Officer Martinez guided him to sit on the curb. I promise I didn't do anything wrong. These are my medicines. I have papers at home that prove it. Officer Rodriguez began photographing the contents of Danny's lunchbox, treating each item like evidence. The rice crackers were bagged and labeled. The bone broth was tested with a field kit designed to detect illegal substances. The supplements were counted and documented with the same care typically reserved for seized narcotics. These pills don't have any identifying marks, Officer Rodriguez observed, holding up one of Danny's digestive enzymes. That's consistent with black market pharmaceuticals. No, sir. They're from a special compounding pharmacy. Danny tried to explain through his tears. Dr. Patterson orders them specially for my condition because the regular ones have ingredients that make me sick. Karen, who had followed them off the bus, crossed her arms triumphantly. See, his story keeps changing. First it was regular medicine. Now it's special compound drugs. That's exactly what dealers train children to say. Meanwhile, word of the incident was spreading rapidly through the parent network of Millbrook Elementary. Jake Morrison, Danny's best friend who rode the same bus, had managed to send a quick text to his mother before Karen confiscated his phone. Danny's in trouble on the bus. Police came. He's crying. The message, though brief, was enough to set off a chain reaction of concerned calls and messages. Sarah Morrison was in the middle of a client meeting at her marketing firm when her phone buzzed with a message from Jake's mother. followed immediately by a call from an unknown number. Mrs. Morrison, this is Officer Martinez with the Millbrook Police Department. We have your son Danny in custody regarding a potential drug-related incident on his school bus. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. I'm sorry. What Danny drugs? There must be some mistake. My son has severe medical conditions. His lunch contains prescribed supplements and, ma'am, we're going to need you to come down to the station to sort this out. Officer Martinez interrupted. And bring any documentation you have regarding these alleged prescriptions? Sarah was already grabbing her keys and running toward the elevator. Don't question my son without me present. He's 11 years old and has anxiety disorders. This could traumatize him permanently. As Sarah raced across town, Danny was being loaded into the back of a police cruiser. Karen Blackwood stood nearby, arms crossed, wearing an expression of righteous satisfaction. She had prevented what she was convinced was a major drug distribution ring, and she expected to be commended for her vigilance. You did the right thing calling this in, Officer Rodriguez told Karen as they prepared to leave the scene. Too many people turn a blind eye to this kind of activity, especially when children are involved. Karen nodded gravely. I've seen what happens when adults don't take action. These drug rings start young, and they prey on children with sob stories about medical conditions. That boy was clearly coached on what to say. The police station was a flurry of activity when Danny arrived. He was fingerprinted despite his age, photographed, and placed in a small interview room typically reserved for juvenile offenders. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made the beige walls seem even more intimidating. Detective Linda Walsh had been called in to handle what was being described as a potential juvenile drug case. She had 15 years of experience with actual drug crimes, and something about this particular case struck her as unusual from the moment she read the initial report. Danny, I'm Detective Walsh, she said gently as she entered the interview room. I know this is scary, but I want you to tell me exactly what happened on the bus today. Danny looked up with red, swollen eyes. The new bus lady said my lunch was drugs, but it's not. It's my medicine that helps my stomach not hurt. My mom has all the papers from my doctor. She shows them to my teachers every year. Detective Walsh had interviewed hundreds of suspects over her career, and this child showed none of the signs of deception she had learned to recognize. His story was consistent, detailed, and delivered with the kind of genuine distress that was nearly impossible to fake. Tell me about your medical conditions. Danny, what kind of problems do you have that require special medicine? Danny wiped his nose with his sleeve and took a shaky breath. I have Crohn's disease, which means my intestines get really inflamed and hurt a lot, and I'm allergic to lots of foods, so I can't eat what other kids eat. The enzymes help me digest food, and the bone broth helps heal my stomach lining. Detective Walsh made notes, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. This was not the vocabulary of a child involved in drug activity. These were medical terms that suggested genuine health issues and parental involvement. Sarah Morrison burst through the police station doors 45 minutes after receiving the call, clutching a thick folder of medical documents. Her face was flushed from running, and her business suit was wrinkled from her hasty departure from work. "Where is my son?" she demanded at the front desk. I'm Sarah Morrison. You called me about Danny. This is a massive misunderstanding, and I have all the documentation to prove it. The desk sergeant looked up with tired eyes. Mrs. Morrison, Detective Walsh is interviewing your son now. She'll be out to speak with you shortly. Interviewing him without me present? Sarah's voice rose dangerously. He's a minor with diagnosed anxiety disorders. This is completely inappropriate, and I want to see him immediately. Detective Walsh emerged from the interview room just as Sarah's voice echoed through the station. She had been a mother herself, and recognized the sound of parental panic mixed with protective fury. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Detective Walsh. Your son is fine, and we haven't formally questioned him. I've just been letting him tell me what happened. But I need to see those medical documents you mentioned." Sarah thrust the folder toward the detective, her hands trembling with adrenaline. "Everything is in there. His diagnoses, his treatment plan, prescriptions for every supplement, letters from his gastroenterologist, his nutritionist, even his school accommodation plan." Detective Walsh opened the folder and began scanning the documents. The first page was a letter from Dr. Patterson, Danny's pediatric gastroenterologist, explaining his conditions in detail and listing the specific supplements required for his treatment. The prescription bottles and documentation were all legitimate, complete with pharmacy labels and dosage instructions. "Mrs. Morrison, this appears to be a significant misunderstanding," Detective Walsh said, her voice apologetic. "But I need to ask, why weren't these medications in their original prescription bottles?" Sarah's expression grew frustrated. "Because the original bottles are huge and don't fit in his lunchbox. The school nurse and his teachers are all aware of his conditions. We transfer his daily doses into smaller containers every morning. It's been the same routine for 3 years. And the school is aware of this arrangement." "Of course they are." Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. "I can call Nurse Peterson right now. She manages his care during school hours and has copies of all his medical documentation." Detective Walsh was beginning to realize the gravity of the mistake that had been made. A child with legitimate medical needs had been traumatized and criminalized because of one person's misguided assumptions. "Let's call the school nurse," Detective Walsh agreed. "And then we'll get Danny reunited with you immediately." Nurse Peterson answered on the second ring, and her voice grew increasingly alarmed as Detective Walsh explained the situation. "Danny Morrison. Oh my goodness, that poor child. Yes, I have all his medical documentation on file. He's been on this treatment regimen for years. His supplements are absolutely essential for his health. And you're aware that he carries these medications in unmarked containers. Of course, his mother and I worked out that system together. The original bottles are too large for his lunchbox, and we didn't want him to feel different from the other children. I can fax you his entire medical file if needed." Detective Walsh hung up the phone and looked at Sarah with genuine remorse. "Mrs. Morrison, I apologize profusely for what your family has been put through today. This was a case of extreme overcaution that resulted in the traumatization of a child with special medical needs." "Can I see my son now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely controlled. "Absolutely. And we'll be having a serious conversation with the bus monitor who initiated this incident." When Sarah entered the interview room, Danny launched himself into her arms with such force that she nearly fell backward. His entire body was shaking, and she could feel his tears soaking through her blouse. "Mom, I tried to tell them, but she wouldn't listen," Danny sobbed. "She said I was lying about being sick. She made everyone on the bus think I was a criminal." Sarah held her son tightly, stroking his hair and whispering reassurances. Over his shoulder, she caught Detective Walsh's eye and mouthed a single word: "lawsuit." Meanwhile, word of the incident had spread throughout the Millbrook Elementary community. Parents were picking up their children early, demanding explanations from the school administration. The videos recorded by students on the bus had been shared on social media, and the hashtag #WeJusticeForDanny was beginning to trend locally. Karen Blackwood was blissfully unaware of the firestorm she had created. She had returned to the school, expecting praise for her vigilance in protecting the children from what she was certain had been a dangerous situation. "I think I may have prevented a major incident today," she told Principal Jennifer Hayes, settling into the chair across from the principal's desk with a self-satisfied expression. That Morrison boy was clearly involved in something suspicious. Principal Hayes looked up from the stack of angry emails that had been flooding her inbox for the past hour. She had been the principal at Millbrook Elementary for 8 years and had never faced a crisis of this magnitude. Karen, I need you to explain exactly what happened on the bus today, Principal Hayes said, her voice carefully controlled, because I'm getting reports that suggest the situation may have been mishandled. Karen launched into her version of events, painting herself as a hero who had protected innocent children from exposure to dangerous drugs. She described Danny as evasive and uncooperative, and insisted that his medical explanations were obviously rehearsed lies. Principal Hayes listened with growing horror. She had Danny's medical documentation in his school file, and she was intimately familiar with his conditions and treatment requirements. The child had been receiving accommodations for his medical needs since kindergarten. Karen, Danny Morrison has documented medical conditions that require daily medication. His mother provides updated medical information every school year, and our nursing staff manages his care during school hours. Karen's confident expression began to falter. Well, how was I supposed to know that nobody briefed me about special medical cases? Because you were hired as a temporary substitute and should have asked questions before taking such drastic action, Principal Hayes replied, her voice growing sharper. You traumatized a vulnerable child and involved law enforcement in what should have been a simple conversation. As the full scope of the mistake became clear, Karen's defensive posture shifted to panic. But I was protecting the children. How was I supposed to know he wasn't lying? Kids lie all the time about this kind of thing. By following proper protocols, which include contacting the school before involving police, and by showing basic compassion for a distressed child. Principal Hayes said firmly, Karen, I'm afraid this incident has created serious liability issues for the district. The news vans began arriving at Millbrook Elementary around 3 p.m., just as regular dismissal was beginning. Parents who had heard about the incident through social media and word of mouth were gathering in the parking lot, many carrying signs demanding accountability and policy changes. Local news reporter Amanda Chen was the first to arrive on scene, having been tipped off by a parent who had seen the viral video of Danny being removed from the bus in handcuffs. The footage, though shaky and brief, clearly showed a small child being treated like a dangerous criminal. This is Amanda Chen reporting from Millbrook Elementary, where parents are demanding answers after an 11-year-old student with medical conditions was removed from his school bus in handcuffs and taken to jail over his prescribed medication. Amanda announced to her cameraman. Sarah Morrison stood in the middle of the growing crowd, still holding Danny protectively against her side. She had agreed to speak with the media after consulting with the attorney she had contacted on the drive home from the police station. My son was humiliated and traumatized because one person decided to play detective instead of showing basic human decency, Sarah told the reporter, her voice shaking with controlled anger. He has been managing serious medical conditions with courage and maturity for years, and today he was treated like a criminal for taking his prescribed medication. Other parents began sharing their own concerns about district policies and the lack of training for substitute staff members. Maria Rodriguez, whose daughter rode the same bus as Danny, spoke about the trauma her child had experienced from witnessing the incident. My daughter came home crying, asking if the police were going to arrest her for bringing her inhaler to school, Maria said. These children don't understand why their friend was treated like a criminal. This has affected the entire school community. As the crowd grew larger and the media attention intensified, Superintendent Robert Williams made the decision to call an emergency school board meeting for that evening. The district was facing potential lawsuits, public relations disaster, and serious questions about its policies regarding students with medical needs. Karen Blackwood, meanwhile, had been sent home for the day, pending an investigation. As she drove through the town center, she saw the protest signs and news vans and began to realize that her actions had created a much bigger situation than she had anticipated. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself as she passed a group of parents holding signs reading, "Protect our medical kids" and "Fire Karen now." I was doing my job. I was protecting children. How is that wrong? But deep down, a small voice was beginning to whisper that perhaps she had made a terrible mistake. The child's tears had seemed so genuine, his explanations so detailed. What if she had been wrong? The emergency school board meeting was held in the high school auditorium to accommodate the unprecedented crowd. Parents, teachers, community members, and media representatives filled every seat, with overflow crowds watching from the lobby on closed-circuit television. Board President Margaret Chen called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. sharp, her expression grave as she surveyed the packed auditorium. "We are here tonight to address the serious incident that occurred today involving a student at Millbrook Elementary." Superintendent Williams took the podium first, providing a timeline of events and acknowledging that serious errors in judgment had occurred. He announced that Karen Blackwood had been immediately terminated and that the district would be reviewing all policies related to student medical needs. While we cannot undo the trauma that was inflicted on this child and his family today, we can ensure that such an incident never happens again, Williams said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine remorse. Sarah Morrison was given the opportunity to address the board directly. She had spent the afternoon helping Danny process what had happened, and her maternal fury had crystallized into determined advocacy. "My son was treated like a criminal for having the courage to manage serious medical conditions," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "But this isn't just about Danny. This is about every child in this district who depends on medication to function normally. What happened today sends the message that these children are suspects first and students second." The audience erupted in applause, with several parents standing to show their support. Sarah continued, outlining specific policy changes she wanted to see implemented: mandatory medical training for all staff members, clear protocols for handling student medications, and a formal apology process for families affected by staff misconduct. Dr. Patterson, Danny's gastroenterologist, had driven 2 hours to attend the meeting and spoke next. His medical expertise lent additional weight to the criticism of how the situation had been handled. Danny Morrison's treatment regimen is complex, but absolutely necessary for his survival and quality of life. Dr. Patterson explained, "The supplements he carries are no different from insulin for a diabetic child, or an inhaler for a child with asthma. To criminalize these medical necessities is not only inappropriate, but potentially dangerous to his health." Board member Janet Williams raised her hand to speak. "Dr. Patterson, in your professional opinion, could interrupting Danny's medication routine have serious health consequences?" "Absolutely," Dr. Patterson replied without hesitation. "Children with Crohn's disease can experience severe flare-ups when their treatment is disrupted. The stress of today's incident alone could trigger symptoms that might require hospitalization." The room fell silent as the medical implications of the day's events sank in. This had not been a simple case of mistaken identity, but a potentially life-threatening disruption of critical medical care. Detective Walsh had also been invited to speak, providing the law enforcement perspective on how the incident had unfolded. Her testimony was damning for Karen Blackwood's actions and supportive of the Morrison family. From a law enforcement standpoint, this incident represents a failure of judgment and protocol. Detective Walsh stated, "The child's story was consistent from the beginning. His distress was genuine, and his medical documentation was comprehensive. A simple phone call to the school nurse would have prevented this entire situation." As the public comment period opened, Speaker after speaker rose to share their concerns and demand accountability. Teachers spoke about the need for better training. Parents shared stories of their own children's medical needs. Community members expressed outrage at how a vulnerable child had been treated. Jake's mother, Lisa Thompson, spoke about the effect the incident had on all the children who witnessed it. "My son called me crying from the bus, afraid that his friend was going to jail. These children have been traumatized by witnessing injustice, and they're old enough to understand that something terrible happened to someone who didn't deserve it." The meeting continued past 10 p.m. as community members shared their perspectives and demanded concrete action. The school board found themselves facing not just a public relations crisis, but a fundamental challenge to their commitment to protecting all students. Karen Blackwood did not attend the meeting, but her actions were dissected and criticized by speaker after speaker. Several parents who had encountered her during her brief tenure described a pattern of aggressive behavior and poor judgment. "She seemed to see threats everywhere," said Tom Chen, the bus driver who had witnessed the entire incident. Even before today, she was constantly suspicious of normal childhood behavior. She treated these kids like potential criminals, instead of the good kids they are. Board member Robert Hayes proposed an immediate policy review and the establishment of a task force to ensure that students with medical needs were properly protected. "We need clear protocols that prioritize child welfare over misguided security concerns," he said. As the meeting drew to a close, Board President Chen announced several immediate actions. Karen Blackwood's termination was confirmed. All substitute staff would receive mandatory training on medical accommodations, and the district would work with families to develop better communication systems. Most importantly, Chen concluded, "We will be establishing a formal process to ensure that no child is ever again criminalized for managing their medical conditions. This district will lead by example in protecting our most vulnerable students." The crowd erupted in sustained applause, but Sarah Morrison remained focused on her son's long-term well-being. The public vindication was important, but the real work of helping Danny heal from this trauma was just beginning. Over the following days, the story continued to gain national attention. Child advocacy groups used Danny's case as an example of how zero-tolerance policies could harm vulnerable students. Medical organizations issued statements supporting the rights of children with chronic conditions to manage their health needs without fear of persecution. Danny himself became something of a reluctant hero among his classmates and the broader community. Children who had previously been embarrassed about their own medical needs began speaking more openly about their conditions, inspired by Danny's courage in the face of injustice. The lawsuit filed by the Morrison family was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, with the funds earmarked for Danny's future medical expenses and college education. More importantly for the family, the settlement included provisions for ongoing policy changes and staff training. Karen Blackwood's attempts to find employment in other school districts were unsuccessful, as news of the incident had spread throughout the educational community. She eventually moved to another state, but not before issuing a grudging apology that many felt was too little. Too late. "I may have acted hastily," her written statement read, "but my intentions were to protect the children under my supervision. I regret any distress this may have caused the Morrison family." The apology was widely criticized as inadequate and self-serving. The real changes came in the form of new district policies that became a model for school systems nationwide. The Danny Morrison Protocol required all staff members to receive annual training on medical accommodations, established clear procedures for handling student medications, and created a rapid response system for resolving concerns without involving law enforcement. Dr. Patterson worked with the district to develop educational materials that helped staff members understand various medical conditions and their treatment requirements. Knowledge defeats fear. He often said during his training sessions, "When people understand medical conditions, they're less likely to see them as threats." Danny slowly recovered from the trauma of his experience, aided by counseling and the overwhelming support of his community. He became an advocate for other children with medical conditions, speaking at school board meetings and health conferences about the importance of understanding and acceptance. I learned that standing up for what's right is important, even when it's scary. Danny told a reporter 6 months after the incident. And I learned that most people are good and want to help when they understand what's really happening. The new bus monitor, who replaced Karen, was Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired nurse who had worked with pediatric patients for 30 years. She made it her mission to learn about each child's individual needs and became beloved by students and parents alike. "Every child on this bus is precious," Mrs. Rodriguez often said. "My job is to keep them safe and help them feel valued. That means understanding them, not judging them." The incident also sparked broader conversations about the criminalization of childhood behaviors and the need for trauma-informed practices in schools. Education experts pointed to Danny's case as an example of how adult fears and biases could cause serious harm to innocent children. Sarah Morrison became an advocate for children with medical conditions, working with state legislators to pass laws protecting students' rights to manage their health needs at school. Her advocacy efforts were directly inspired by her son's experience and her determination to prevent similar incidents. "Danny's ordeal opened my eyes to how vulnerable our medically complex children really are," Sarah said during a legislative hearing. "They face enough challenges managing their conditions. They shouldn't have to fear persecution for taking care of their health." The Millbrook Elementary community grew stronger through the crisis, with parents, teachers, and administrators working together to create a more inclusive and understanding environment. The incident had revealed weaknesses in their systems, but it also demonstrated their capacity for positive change. Principal Hayes, who had initially feared for her career after the incident, found that her honest handling of the crisis and commitment to reform had actually strengthened her position in the community. She implemented regular forums where parents could voice concerns and suggestions, creating an ongoing dialogue about student welfare. We learned that transparency and accountability are essential. Principal Hayes reflected a year later. "When we make mistakes, we must own them, learn from them, and do better. That's what we owe our children and families." Danny's story became required reading in education programs at several universities, used as a case study in the importance of understanding student diversity and the dangers of making assumptions based on limited information. Future teachers learned about the real-world consequences of inadequate training and poor judgment. The video of Danny being removed from the bus, which had initially spread as evidence of injustice, was eventually used in training programs to help staff members recognize the signs of a child in distress and the importance of de-escalation techniques. As Danny entered middle school 2 years later, his experience had shaped him into a more confident and articulate young person. He no longer feared being different because of his medical needs, and he had learned the power of speaking truth even in frightening circumstances. The lunchbox that had caused so much trouble was retired and replaced with a new one featuring his favorite superhero. But Danny kept the old Spider-Man box in his room as a reminder of the day he learned that justice sometimes requires ordinary people to stand up and demand what's right. "Mom, do you think what happened to me helped other kids?" Danny asked Sarah one evening as they prepared his lunch for the next day. Sarah smiled as she carefully portioned his supplements into their small containers, each now clearly labeled with medical information, as required by the new district policies. "I think it did, sweetheart. Sometimes, difficult experiences can lead to positive changes that help lots of people." "Then maybe it was worth it," Danny said thoughtfully. "I mean, it was really scary, But if it helps other kids not be scared of their medicine, then maybe it was worth it. The wisdom and compassion in her son's words brought tears to Sarah's eyes. The child who had been so traumatized by adult prejudice and fear had grown into a young person who could find meaning and purpose in his suffering. The legacy of that terrible Tuesday morning lived on in the policies, training programs, and cultural changes that emerged from the community's response to injustice. Danny Morrison's lunchbox incident had become a catalyst for protecting all children who were different, vulnerable, or misunderstood. Years later, when Danny graduated from high school as valedictorian, he used his speech to remind his classmates about the importance of standing up for those who are different or marginalized. His words echoed through the auditorium, carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. We all have the power to choose understanding over fear, compassion over judgment, and justice over convenience. Danny told his graduating class, "Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with truth, courage, and the determination to protect those who cannot protect themselves." In the audience, Sarah Morrison wiped away tears of pride as she watched her son transform his childhood trauma into a message of hope and empowerment. The scared little boy who had sobbed on a concrete curb had grown into a young man who understood the power of turning pain into purpose. The story of Danny Morrison and his lunchbox became part of Millbrook Elementary's institutional memory, a reminder that the way a community responds to crisis reveals its true character. And in choosing justice, compassion, and reform over defensiveness and denial, the community had proven that even the most painful experiences could become the foundation for positive change. Karen Blackwood's name was remembered only as a cautionary tale, while Danny Morrison's became synonymous with courage, resilience, and the power of standing up for what is right. His story continued to inspire educators, parents, and children long after the headlines faded, proving that sometimes the smallest voices can create the biggest changes.